Before you try to fix your energy, sharpen your focus, or reshape your body, understand this: every night, your brain decides whether to heal you or hold you hostage to yesterday. That decision is not made by motivation or discipline, but by the final emotional signal you give yourself before rest. In the quiet moments when the world stops demanding, your nervous system is listening closely, asking a single question: is it safe to let go, or must I stay alert? What you think, feel, and allow in that moment determines whether your brain enters deep repair or carries unfinished tension into your cells, your sleep, and ultimately, your health. Consistency in daily rhythms is one of the most underestimated forces shaping human energy and mental clarity. The brain is not designed to operate in chaos, it evolved to anticipate patterns. When you wake, eat, move, and rest at irregular times, the brain must constantly adjust its internal predictions. This adjustment costs energy. It creates subtle stress signals that most people mistake for normal fatigue or lack of motivation. When rhythms stabilize, the brain no longer wastes resources guessing what comes next, and that efficiency shows up as smoother energy and sharper focus. The center of this process is the brain's internal timing system, a network of biological clocks that coordinate everything from hormone release to body temperature and digestion. These clocks rely less on intention and more on repetition. Each consistent habit acts like a daily reminder, reinforcing when certain systems should activate or power down. When waking times are regular, cortisol rises in a controlled arc rather than in chaotic bursts. This produces alertness without anxiety and energy without agitation. The mind feels awake, but not rushed. Eating at predictable times sends equally powerful signals. Digestion is not an isolated process, it is deeply connected to brain chemistry. When meals arrive inconsistently, insulin and glucose regulation becomes erratic, and the brain responds by triggering cravings and mental fog. Consistent meal timing allows metabolic hormones to work with precision, stabilizing blood sugar and supporting sustained attention. Over time, this rhythm reduces energy crashes and the need for constant stimulation. Movement, when practiced regularly rather than sporadically, reinforces this internal order. The brain interprets repeated physical activity at similar times as evidence of environmental stability. Muscles release chemical messengers that influence circadian clocks, enhancing coordination between physical and cognitive systems. Energy becomes more accessible because the body has learned when to prepare for effort and when to recover. Fitness improves not only through stronger muscles, but through improved communication between brain and body. Sleep, perhaps the most sensitive rhythm, depends heavily on what happens during the day. When daily patterns are predictable, the brain begins preparing for rest long before bedtime. Melatonin release becomes smoother, and nighttime recovery deepens. Memory consolidation improves, emotional regulation stabilizes, and the immune system operates more efficiently. Waking up feels less like restarting a machine and more like continuing a process that was already aligned. What makes rhythmic consistency so powerful is that it reduces cognitive friction. Decision fatigue decreases because fewer choices need to be made. The brain prefers automation for survival, and routines provide exactly that. When the nervous system is not constantly responding to novelty, it can redirect energy toward creativity, problem-solving, and physical performance. Focus sharpens because attention is no longer divided between the present task and underlying physiological confusion. There is also a psychological layer to consistency that reinforces the biology. Predictable rhythms build a sense of safety. Safety is not an emotional luxury, it is a biological requirement for optimal function. When the brain senses reliability, it reduces defensive chemistry and increases neurotransmitters associated with curiosity and motivation. Energy feels internally generated rather than forced, and focus becomes easier to sustain because the brain is no longer scanning for disruption. Importantly, consistency does not require perfection. The brain responds to patterns, not rigidity. Small variations are tolerated, but repeated unpredictability weakens the signal. Even partial regularity, maintained over time, strengthens internal synchronization. This is why simple routines often outperform complex wellness strategies. They speak the brain's native language of repetition and expectation. As these rhythms stabilize, something subtle shifts in how effort is experienced. Tasks that once felt draining require less willpower. Physical activity feels more inviting. Mental work becomes less fragmented. The body is not doing more, it is coordinating better. Energy is conserved, focus is sharpened, and fitness becomes sustainable because the systems involved are no longer competing with one another. The true benefit of consistent daily rhythms is not discipline or productivity, but coherence. The brain, body, and environment begin operating on shared timing. When this alignment occurs, health improvements feel less like struggle and more like momentum, created quietly through repetition rather than force. Regular, non-punitive movement reshapes the brain in ways that go far beyond muscle strength or calorie use. The brain interprets movement as information about survival. When physical activity is consistent and approachable rather than extreme or exhausting, the nervous system receives a steady message that the body is capable and the environment is manageable. This perception changes how energy is produced, allocated, and experienced throughout the day. From a biological perspective, movement acts as a conversation between muscles and the brain. Contracting muscles release signaling molecules that travel through the bloodstream and influence neural function. These signals improve how neurons use fuel and increase the availability of substances that support learning, memory, and emotional regulation. When movement is gentle but regular, the brain adapts by becoming more efficient rather than more defensive. Energy begins to feel renewable instead of limited. Punitive exercise often backfires because the brain associates it with threat. Excessive strain, pain, or inconsistency triggers stress responses designed for short-term survival, not long-term vitality. Cortisol rises, inflammation increases, and recovery systems are suppressed. While this may produce temporary physical changes, it trains the brain to conserve energy afterward. In contrast, non-punitive movement teaches the nervous system that activity is safe. Over time, this lowers baseline stress and allows energy systems to remain open and responsive. One of the most profound effects of regular movement is its impact on glucose regulation. Muscles that are used frequently become more sensitive to insulin, allowing sugar to enter cells efficiently. The brain benefits directly from this stability. Fluctuating blood sugar creates mental fatigue, irritability, and difficulty concentrating. When movement is woven naturally into daily life, the brain receives a steady supply of fuel, and focus becomes easier to maintain without reliance on stimulants. Movement also enhances blood flow to the brain, increasing oxygen and nutrient delivery. This improves mental clarity and reaction time, but it also supports long-term brain health. Areas involved in planning, attention, and emotional balance become more resilient. Regular movement strengthens connections between these regions, making it easier to shift attention, regulate mood, and recover from stress. Fitness, in this sense, becomes a cognitive asset as much as a physical one. The rhythm of movement matters as much as the activity itself. Short bouts spread across the day send repeated signals of vitality. The brain responds by staying metabolically flexible, able to switch between rest and action without friction. This flexibility is what people often describe as having energy. It is not excess force, but readiness. The body feels prepared rather than depleted. There is also an emotional intelligence to non-punitive movement. When exercise is approached with curiosity instead of judgment, the brain associates physical effort with reward rather than obligation. Dopamine pathways involved in motivation become more responsive, making movement self-reinforcing. This is why people who move regularly often feel drawn to activity rather than forcing themselves into it. The habit sustains itself because the brain has learned that movement restores rather than drains. Over time, this relationship between movement and energy reshapes identity. Instead of seeing the body as something to control or correct, the brain begins to experience it as a cooperative system. This reduces internal resistance, which is one of the largest hidden drains on energy. Mental effort decreases because the nervous system is no longer negotiating with itself. Fitness improves naturally within this framework. Muscles strengthen, coordination improves, and endurance increases, but these changes occur alongside enhanced recovery. Sleep quality improves because the body has used its energy during the day in a balanced way. Inflammation decreases, allowing tissues to repair more efficiently. The brain notices these improvements and further reinforces the behavior. The most powerful aspect of regular, non-punitive movement is that it changes the meaning of effort. Effort becomes a signal of engagement rather than strain. The brain stops bracing against activity and starts supporting it. Energy becomes something that appears when movement begins, not something that must be saved for later. Focus sharpens because the body and brain are working in synchrony, guided by consistent signals of capability and care. Brief, intentional pauses throughout the day have a disproportionate effect on mental clarity and physical resilience because they interrupt stress before it hardens into a chronic state. The brain is constantly evaluating whether the environment is safe or demanding, and it uses subtle cues from breathing, muscle tension, and attention to make that judgment. When stress goes uninterrupted, the nervous system assumes threat is ongoing. This keeps emergency chemistry active, diverting energy away from thinking, digestion, and recovery. Short stress regulation pauses reset this interpretation, allowing the brain to return to balance without needing extended rest. At the center of this process is the relationship between breathing and the autonomic nervous system. Slow, deliberate exhalation sends a direct signal that urgency has passed. Heart rate decreases, blood pressure softens, and the brain reduces the release of stress hormones. These changes happen quickly, often within seconds, because the nervous system is designed to respond rapidly to safety signals. What matters is not the length of the pause, but its quality and intention. When these pauses are practiced consistently, the brain begins to anticipate relief. Stress no longer escalates as easily because the nervous system has learned that regulation is available. This learning alters baseline physiology. Cortisol patterns normalize, inflammatory signaling decreases, and immune function improves. Mental clarity increases because the brain is no longer overloaded with threat monitoring. Focus becomes more stable because attention is not constantly being pulled toward internal alarm. Stress regulation pauses also preserve cognitive resources. Under stress, the brain prioritizes speed over accuracy, relying on habitual responses rather than thoughtful decision-making. This is useful in emergencies, but exhausting when maintained all day. Brief pauses allow higher brain regions involved in planning, empathy, and self-control to remain engaged. This supports better choices around food, movement, and communication, which in turn reinforce physical health. Physically, the body benefits from reduced muscular tension. Chronic stress causes subtle, continuous contraction in the neck, shoulders, jaw, and lower back. These contractions restrict blood flow and contribute to pain and fatigue. Intentional pauses that include relaxation of these areas restore circulation and reduce strain. Over time, the body learns to maintain a lower level of baseline tension, conserving energy for movement and repair. Another important effect of stress regulation pauses is their influence on digestion and metabolism. Stress suppresses digestive activity because survival systems take priority. When stress is frequent and unrelieved, nutrient absorption suffers, and metabolic efficiency declines. Brief pauses allow the digestive system to re-engage, improving how the body extracts energy from food. This directly supports sustained energy and reduces the sense of heaviness or fatigue that often follows meals under stress. Emotionally, these pauses create psychological distance from immediate pressures. They allow thoughts to be observed rather than obeyed. This reduces emotional reactivity and prevents minor challenges from triggering disproportionate responses. Over time, this emotional regulation reshapes neural pathways associated with resilience. The brain becomes better at returning to equilibrium after disruption, which is a key marker of both mental and physical fitness. Importantly, stress regulation pauses do not eliminate stress, they teach the brain how to metabolize it. Stress becomes a temporary signal rather than a permanent state. This shift changes how effort feels. Tasks can be demanding without being draining. Energy is preserved because the body is not constantly preparing for threat. The cumulative effect of these pauses is subtle but powerful. Each moment of regulation reinforces a neural pattern that values recovery alongside action. This pattern improves sleep quality because the nervous system enters rest more easily. Muscles repair more efficiently, and the immune system functions with greater precision. Focus improves not because distractions disappear, but because the brain has learned how to release tension instead of carrying it forward. Over time, the practice of brief stress regulation pauses changes the internal environment in which all other habits operate. Movement becomes easier, eating becomes more intuitive, and thinking becomes clearer. The body and brain stop competing for resources and begin sharing them intelligently. Energy is no longer constantly leaking through stress responses, and physical recovery is supported even in the midst of busy days, allowing health to be maintained without withdrawing from life. Evening disengagement plays a crucial role in restoring the body's internal timing because the brain relies on environmental cues to decide when to shift from action to repair. Throughout the day, the nervous system is oriented toward alertness, decision-making, and movement. As daylight fades, the brain expects signals that confirm it is safe to slow down. When these signals are absent, the brain remains in a semi-alert state, delaying recovery processes that are essential for physical and mental health. Light is one of the most influential signals in this transition. Bright or artificial light in the evening suppresses the natural rise of melatonin, a hormone that prepares the brain and body for rest. When melatonin release is delayed or reduced, sleep becomes lighter and less restorative. Muscles repair more slowly, immune activity weakens, and metabolic regulation becomes less precise. Gradual reduction in light exposure allows melatonin to increase naturally, guiding the nervous system into a state where deep recovery is possible beyond light. Cognitive stimulation also affects the brain's ability to disengage. Intense problem-solving, emotional conflict, or constant digital input keeps neural circuits active that are meant to quiet down at night. This ongoing stimulation maintains elevated stress hormones, even if the body is physically still. The brain interprets this as unfinished business, delaying the shift into repair mode. Gentle transitions, such as slower conversation or quieter activities, signal completion rather than continuation, allowing the nervous system to release tension physiologically. Evening disengagement reduces sympathetic nervous system activity. Heart rate and blood pressure begin to decrease, and blood flow shifts away from muscles toward internal organs. This supports digestion and nutrient assimilation, processes that are often compromised by late-night stimulation. When digestion is efficient, the body has more resources available for tissue repair and hormonal balance during sleep. Emotionally, disengagement creates a boundary between the demands of the day and the restorative processes of the night. Carrying unresolved emotional activation into sleep increases nighttime awakenings and reduces the quality of deep sleep stages. Creating calm mental space in the evening helps the brain process emotional experiences more efficiently, preventing them from intruding into rest. Over time, this improves emotional regulation and resilience. Evening routines also help reinforce circadian rhythms through predictability. Repeating calming behaviors at similar times each night trains the brain to anticipate rest. This anticipation improves sleep onset and continuity. The brain is highly responsive to pattern recognition, and consistent evening signals strengthen the association between certain behaviors and recovery. This reduces the need for external sleep aids and supports natural regulation. Disengagement is not about avoidance or withdrawal from life. It is about timing. Just as muscles require rest after exertion, the brain requires a period of decompression after sustained attention. Without this decompression, neural fatigue accumulates, leading to reduced focus, increased irritability, and diminished physical performance the following day. Evening disengagement clears this fatigue before it compounds. There is also a hormonal dimension to this process. Growth hormone, which supports tissue repair and metabolic health, is released primarily during deep sleep. When the brain enters sleep in a calm, regulated state, this release is optimized. Evening disengagement indirectly enhances this process by ensuring that the nervous system is not competing with stress hormones during early sleep cycles. Over time, the benefits of consistent evening disengagement extend beyond sleep itself. Morning energy improves because the body has completed its overnight repair work. Inflammation decreases, reducing stiffness and discomfort. Cognitive clarity increases because neural circuits have been refreshed. These improvements reinforce the habit as the brain learns to associate disengagement with tangible benefits. Perhaps most importantly, evening disengagement restores the body's trust in rest. In a culture that often values constant engagement, rest can feel unproductive or even unsafe. By practicing intentional disengagement, the brain relearns that slowing down is not a threat but a necessity. This reframing reduces internal resistance to rest, allowing recovery to occur more fully. As this pattern becomes established, the boundary between day and night grows clearer. The brain no longer drags alertness into sleep or sleepiness into waking. Rhythms stabilize, and the body operates with greater efficiency. Health improves not through additional effort, but through respect for biological timing and the natural need to alternate between engagement and restoration. The way a day is mentally closed has a profound influence on how the brain repairs itself during rest. The nervous system does not simply shut down at night, it continues processing emotional information, strengthening some neural pathways while allowing others to fade. The emotional tone carried into rest acts as a filter, guiding what the brain considers important enough to preserve. When the day ends in agitation, self-criticism, or unresolved mental loops, the brain remains partially alert, diverting resources away from deep recovery. Gentle reflection changes this internal environment. Taking a few moments to acknowledge experiences without judgment signals safety. This signal is critical because the brain only commits fully to repair when it perceives low threat. Cortisol levels soften, heart rate variability improves, and the nervous system shifts toward parasympathetic dominance. These physiological changes create the conditions required for effective neural maintenance, including synaptic pruning and memory consolidation. During sleep, the brain selectively strengthens useful connections and weakens redundant or emotionally charged ones. This process is influenced by emotional context. When reflection is compassionate rather than critical, the brain is more likely to integrate learning without amplifying stress. Mistakes are stored as information, not threats. This reduces the emotional weight carried forward into the next day and supports psychological resilience. Mental closure also affects how the brain organizes memory. Without closure, the brain repeatedly revisits unresolved issues, fragmenting attention and increasing nighttime awakenings. A sense of completion, even if imperfect, allows the brain to categorize experiences as finished. This improves sleep continuity and increases time spent in deeper stages where physical repair and immune function are enhanced. Physically, the benefits of effective mental closure are significant. Reduced stress hormone activity allows muscles to relax fully, improving circulation and oxygen delivery to tissues. This supports recovery from daily wear and tear. Pain sensitivity decreases because the nervous system is less sensitized. Inflammatory processes, which are amplified by chronic emotional stress, are downregulated, supporting long-term health. Emotionally, reflection without rumination strengthens neural pathways associated with self-regulation. Instead of reinforcing cycles of worry or regret, the brain practices acceptance. This reduces baseline anxiety and improves emotional flexibility. Over time, the brain becomes better at distinguishing between what requires action and what requires release. Mental closure also supports identity formation. The stories people tell themselves before rest shape how the brain perceives capability and safety. When reflection includes acknowledgement of effort, growth, or gratitude, neural circuits associated with motivation and confidence are reinforced. This does not require positivity or denial of difficulty. It requires recognition without hostility. The brain learns that challenge does not equal failure. This habit influences morning energy as well. When the brain completes its overnight organizational tasks, waking feels clearer and lighter. Cognitive fog decreases because fewer unresolved emotional threads compete for attention. Physical readiness improves because repair processes were uninterrupted. Energy becomes available more quickly because it is not being spent on internal conflict. Importantly, mental closure is not about controlling thoughts. Attempts to force calm often increase tension. Effective closure allows thoughts to arise and pass without engagement. This teaches the brain that awareness does not require reaction. Over time, this reduces the intensity of intrusive thinking and supports mental clarity. The cumulative effect of this habit is subtle but transformative. Each evening of gentle reflection reinforces a neural expectation of safety and completion. This expectation reshapes how stress is processed during the day. Challenges feel less overwhelming because the brain trusts that resolution is possible. Physical health benefits because recovery systems are consistently activated. As this pattern becomes ingrained, the boundary between effort and rest becomes clearer. The brain learns when to engage deeply and when to release fully. This rhythm supports sustained energy, emotional balance, and physical resilience. Mental closure at the end of the day does not erase difficulty, but it ensures that the body and brain enter rest unburdened, allowing repair to unfold with efficiency and quiet strength.